Before anything else, Ethan, you need to understand who he was. Because looking from the outside, nothing seemed wrong. He had a stable life, a good job, an organized routine. He woke up early, always at the same time, prepared coffee, in silence. Left the house without rushing. No delays, no surprises. He was the type of person who doesn't cause trouble, who doesn't complain, who doesn't bother anyone. And maybe that was the first mistake, because his life worked. But it didn't happen. The days passed without leaving a mark. The weeks repeated themselves, and the years began to blend together. Everything was in its place, but nothing really made sense. He wasn't sad, but he wasn't happy either. It was as if he were living on autopilot, without noticing, without questioning, without stopping. And when we live like this, something starts to grow, slowly, almost invisible. A tiredness, but not that physical tiredness. It's deeper, more silent, harder to explain. At first, he ignored it, as he always did, because it was just a phase, just stress, just routine, nothing important. But the problem is that some things don't go away. They stay, and they grow. The mornings began to feel heavy. The nights became too long. And that feeling no longer disappeared. It was as if something was wrong, but without giving clear signs, no pain, no warning, just a presence. And even so, he continued, working, fulfilling everything, pretending that everything was fine, until one day, something small happened, but it was enough to change everything. At first, he tried to ignore it, as he always did. After all, everyone feels tired sometimes. Everyone goes through phases. That was all it was. Or at least, that's what he repeated to himself. But his body began to disagree. The mornings became harder. It wasn't laziness. It was a weight. As if getting out of bed required more than it should. The nights also changed. Sleep didn't come easily. And when it did, it wasn't restful. It was as if he slept, but didn't switch off. And gradually, that began to invade everything. His work, his conversations, the small moments of the day. Nothing serious enough to be frightening, but constant enough to be bothersome. And the strangest thing is that no one noticed. He continued functioning, responding, producing, existing, as always. Because some people learn to hide it well, even from themselves, but then something different happened. It was quick, simple, almost insignificant. Someone looked at him for a few seconds longer and asked a question. "Are you okay?" Nothing invasive, nothing deep, but enough to break something, because it had been a long time since anyone had asked that, and more than that, it had been a long time since he had asked himself. He answered automatically, "I am." But this time, the answer wasn't convincing, not to the person who asked, and much less to him. That question lingered, echoing, returning, bothering him, because when someone truly looks, it's hard to pretend everything is fine. And it was at that moment, almost imperceptible, that something changed. For the first time, he considered a possibility. What if it wasn't just tiredness? What if there was something actually wrong? The idea seemed exaggerated, unnecessary, but still, it didn't go away. And after days of ignoring it, he made a simple decision. No drama, no urgency. He scheduled an appointment just to be safe, just to get it out of his head, just to prove that everything was fine. But he didn't know yet that that small decision was going to open a door that would never close again. The appointment was set. like any other. No urgency. No worry. He chose any random time, between one commitment and another, as if it were just one more task of the day. On the scheduled day, he went alone, as he always did. He arrived a few minutes early, sat in the waiting room, took out his phone, tried to distract himself. But there was something different, an internal silence that wasn't there before. Nothing strong, nothing clear, but present. His name was called. He stood up, entered, greeted the doctor, sat down, and for a few seconds, everything seemed absolutely normal. Simple questions, automatic answers. Feeling anything different? Nothing much. Sleeping well? More or less. Any pain? Not exactly. Everything within expectations. Everything under control. Until the doctor decided to go further. He ordered some tests. Nothing alarming, nothing urgent. Just to be sure. The phrase sounded light, almost irrelevant, and he accepted, without thinking much. Because when we believe everything is fine, we don't worry. The tests were done, quick, simple, and soon they were left behind. He returned to the routine, work, commitments, identical days, and for a while, it left his mind, almost disappeared, as if it had never happened. Until, a few days later, the phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. It was the doctor's office. The voice on the other side was polite, calm, but there was something different. We need you to come back. Just that. No explanation, no details, and even being a simple sentence, something about it didn't seem normal. He hung up, stared at nothing, for a few seconds, maybe minutes, and it was there, for the first time, that he truly felt it. It wasn't just tiredness anymore. It wasn't just doubt anymore. It was something bigger, something he didn't yet understand. But that was already there, and this time, he couldn't ignore it. This time, he didn't go the same way. The path to the office seemed longer, more silent, without distractions. He didn't play music, didn't look at his phone, just drove, in silence, thinking, or maybe trying not to think. Because when we don't know what's coming, the mind tries to fill the gaps, and almost always, it imagines the worst. He arrived, got out of the car, took a deep breath, and went in. The waiting room was the same, the people too, but the feeling was completely different. This time, he didn't take out his phone. He didn't try to distract himself. He just stayed there, looking, waiting, feeling. His name was called. He stood up, entered, and noticed immediately. Something was different. The doctor didn't smile, not like before. There was no lightness, just care. He sat down, and the silence began to weigh. That kind of silence that precedes something important, something that changes everything. The doctor took the tests, looked again, as if he wanted to be sure, as if he were choosing every word. And it was at that moment, that time, slowed down, because sometimes the body notices before the mind. And he noticed, without knowing exactly what, but he knew. It wasn't good. Then came the sentence, direct, straight to the point, no preparation, simple enough to be understood instantly, heavy enough to never be forgotten, and after that, the world continued. But he did not. He stayed still. There, in that chair, looking, listening, without hearing. Because when something like this happens, the mind tries to protect itself. It blocks, it diminishes, it distances, but it doesn't resolve, because the truth had already been spoken, and there was no going back. In that moment, his life was divided into two parts. Before that day, and everything that would come after. And the strangest thing is that at first, he felt nothing. No fear, no despair, no sadness. Just emptiness, as if it weren't real yet. But it was. And in the following minutes, he would begin to understand just how much everything had just changed. He left the room without knowing exactly how. He didn't remember the last words, didn't remember what he answered. He just stood up and left, as if he were on autopilot, as if the body knew the way. Even with the mind stopped, the hallway seemed longer, more silent, emptier. He passed by people without seeing anyone, as if he were there, but wasn't. He left the building. The air outside was the same. People kept walking, cars passing by, everything exactly the same. But nothing made sense because the world doesn't change when something big happens to you. It continues, and that is what's most frightening. He got into the car, sat still, without starting the engine, without touching his phone, without doing anything, just staring ahead. And it was there, for the first time, that it began to sink in, not all at once, slowly, heavy, inevitable. The words began to return, fragmented, loose but clear enough, and with them came the questions, many, fast, without answers. What happens now? How much time? What if? But none of them had an answer in that moment, because when reality changes like this, the mind doesn't keep up at the same speed. It tries, but it can't. And then, something stronger appears. The silence, an internal silence. Deep. It doesn't scream, but it weighs. And in that silence, something began to change. Not outside, but inside him. Because for the first time, in a long time, he stopped. Stopped thinking about the routine. Stopped thinking about work. Stopped thinking about what came next. And started thinking about his own life. About what he lived. What he let pass by. What he postponed. Always with the same idea. I'll do it later. But now, the later didn't seem so certain anymore. And this perception was more frightening than the news itself, because it brought a simple truth, and a hard one to accept. Maybe he didn't have all the time he imagined, and if that were true, everything would need to change. In the following days, life continued, at least on the outside. He woke up at the same time, went to work, fulfilled commitments. Everything seemed the same, but it wasn't, because inside him, something had changed, and it wasn't small. It was the way he saw everything. The same streets seemed different, the same people, distant, the same conversations, empty. Things that before went unnoticed, now bothered him. Time, for example. Before, it seemed infinite. Now, it seemed short, too fast, slipping away, without control. And that's when he began to observe, more than ever, small details, silences, expressions, absences. He realized that many relationships were superficial, that many conversations had no truth, and that many people were there, but weren't present. And this perception hurt, because along with it came another, even harder. He had also done that with other people, with his own life. How many times had he postponed something important? How many times did he choose routine instead of what really mattered? How many times did he say later without knowing if that later would come? The answers were not comfortable, and maybe that's why he had never stopped to think before. But now, it could no longer be avoided. Because when we understand that time is limited, ignoring it stops being an option. And it was at that point that something began to be born. A decision. Still silent. Still without form. But present. He couldn't change the past. But he could still choose what to do with what remained. And that idea changed everything. Because for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to just continue living. He wanted to really live. And that difference is where everything begins to change. The change didn't happen all at once. There was no grand moment, no dramatic decision. It was more silent than that, more real. It started with small things, almost imperceptible. He picked up his phone and stopped for a few seconds, thought, and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He called. On the other end, the surprise was immediate. You? Did something happen? The question was sincere, but it revealed something important. It had been a long time since he had appeared, and that hurt more than he expected. But even so, he continued. In the following days, other small changes emerged. He replied to messages he previously ignored, accepted invitations he previously refused, stayed longer in conversations he previously ended quickly, and gradually, something began to return. Connection, presence. But not everything was like before, because some people had already moved on. Some relationship had already cooled, and others no longer existed. And that brought a difficult feeling. Regret. Not for what he did, but for what he didn't do. For the lost moments, for the ignored opportunities, for the people he left for later. And maybe that was the heaviest part, because unlike the future, the past doesn't change. It doesn't come back, it doesn't wait. But even so, and he didn't stop. Because now, he understood something essential. It wasn't about recovering everything. It was about not losing anymore. And that difference completely changed the way he began to act. He started to value the now, simple conversations, small encounters, moments that before seemed unimportant. Because now, everything had weight, everything had value, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something different. But along with that came a question he still didn't know how to answer. Is there still time to change everything? And deep down, he was already starting to suspect that maybe not everything could be recovered. As the days passed, the changes became clearer, not just to him, but to those around him. You are different. He heard that more than once, but he didn't explain. He wouldn't even know how, because it wasn't something visible. It was internal. It was the way he saw everything now. Time, especially. Before, he always thought he had a lot of it, that he could wait, postpone, leave it for later. But now, each day seemed smaller, faster, more important. And that brought something unexpected. Urgency. Not that desperate urgency, but a silent urgency. To live, to resolve, to leave nothing else pending. And that was when he began to face something difficult. The people. Who was really present? Who only showed up when it was convenient? Whom did he also stop looking for? Because when we stop looking only outward and start looking inward, some truths appear. And not all of them are comfortable. He realized that many relationships were shallow, that many conversations had no truth, and that many presences were not real. But he also realized something else. Some people were still there, even after all this time, even after the distance. And those made a difference, more than he imagined. He began to draw closer to them, with more attention, more truth, more intention, without rushing, without distraction. And in those moments, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, real connection. But along with that came an inevitable question. Why didn't I do this before? And the answer came without needing to think. Because he thought he would always have time. And that illusion is the most dangerous of all. Because while we believe in it, life passes by. And when we realize it, it has already changed. It's already gone. And maybe that is the biggest turn in this story. Because the problem was never time. It was the way he chose to use it. And now, he could no longer pretend he didn't know. After all this, he understood one thing. Clear, simple, but impossible to ignore. Life hadn't changed on that day. It had always been this way. What changed was his consciousness. And when that happens, there's no going back. He began to look at everything with more truth, at people, at time, and especially at himself. And that's when he made a decision, not impulsive, not emotional, but conscious. He didn't know how much time he had, but he knew he didn't want to waste any more. So he began to organize his own life, resolving pending matters, closing cycles, saying things he never said, and especially acting without postponing, without waiting for the perfect moment, because now he knew that that moment doesn't exist. He reached out to important people, had difficult conversations, apologized, heard things he might not have wanted to, but he stayed, present, truly. And that changed something inside him, not the situation, but the way he lived it. He was no longer on autopilot. He was conscious, and that brought something unexpected. Peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because he was finally living in a real way, without running away, without postponing, without pretending. And it was at that moment that he realized something even deeper. That news hadn't just taken something from him. It had also given something. Clarity. But that clarity came with a price. Because the more he understood, the more a question grew. A difficult question, direct, and impossible to avoid. If I had lived like this before, how much different would it have been? And that question was the only one he couldn't answer. In the end, it wasn't the news that marked him most. It wasn't the fear. It wasn't the uncertainty. It was the consciousness, the perception of something simple, but which changes everything. Life doesn't warn you. It doesn't prepare you. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It simply happens. And when you realize, too much time has already passed. He couldn't go back, couldn't recover everything, couldn't live again the moments he let pass by. But he could do one thing, the only thing that really mattered now: choose how to live the time that still existed. And that's what he did, with more presence, more truth, more intention, without leaving it for later, without postponing words, without ignoring people. Because now, he understood, value is not in the time we have, but in what we do with it. And maybe that's the most important part of this story. Because it's not just about him. It's about you too. About how many times you said, "I'll do it later. I'll see about it later. I'll talk later." But what if that later doesn't come? What if the moment is now? Maybe there is still time to call, to show up, to say what was never said, to be present, truly. Because in the end, it's not what you accumulated that stays. It's what you lived. It's whom you valued. It's who was with you when it really mattered. And the question that remains is, are you living or just passing through the days? If this story made you stop for a few seconds, think, or even feel something you didn't expect, then it has already fulfilled its purpose. Because in the end, it's not about him. It's about how many times we ignore signals, postpone decisions, and live as if time were infinite, but it's not. And maybe what you just heard is the reminder that was missing. Now I want to know from you, what would you do differently if you discovered today that time is not guaranteed? Comment below. I read them all. And if this kind of story grips you, makes you reflect, and shows you things we normally avoid, subscribe to the channel, because here, every story has a reason. Leave a like to help the content reach more people, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. Because sometimes, a single story can change everything. See you in the next video.